Good evening, everyone that's on already. We just wanted to let you know we're going to give everyone until about 5:30 to join us, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Good evening to everyone that's joined us so far. Just to give you a status update, we're just waiting until 5:30 to make sure everyone who wants to participate has logged on, and then we'll get started with our presentation. Good evening, everyone. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation this evening. Just for everyone that just joined us, we're going to wait just a couple more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation for this evening. All right, it's 5:30. Paul, do you want to go ahead and start us off, or should we give
Or
people?
Margaret, yeah.
Or Margaret, yeah, sorry. Or do we want to give people just a few more minutes?
It's 5:31. We've got 24 participants here. I think I'm okay to get started.
Okay. Ready when you are.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Margaret Ambrosino. I'm the acting planning manager for Los Alamos County. And I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight. This meeting is our public kickoff of phase 2, the Development Code Review and Findings Report, or what we've been calling internally as our Code Diagnosis Report. And together with our consultant, Decker Parrott Sabatini, we're in the process of finalizing phase 1 of the work, which was, as many of you have participated, the downtown master plans for Los Alamos Town Site and White Rock. And with that, I'll turn it over to DPS, let them introduce themselves and present their findings.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us this evening. We have a lot to share with you, and we really appreciate your interest and your engagement on this issue. So with us tonight, I'm Will Gleason, the principal at Decker Parrott Sabatini, I lead up the planning group there. We have Katrina Arndt, who's been managing the downtown master plan process. You probably recognize her face, and Jessica Lawless, who's heading up our code diagnosis, along with Kate Meliscus, urban planner, and Swapna on our team as well. So, like I said, this is our kickoff for the for the development code update, and this is our technical review findings. So, so let's just get into it. This is our team. You've probably seen this before, and really we've been the lead on this, and Matt Myers has been our legal counsel, especially on the code update portion of this. So those are the primary players for this portion of our work. And we've been at this for a while now. We started about mid-year last year on the downtown master plans. And we've had kind of a soft start on the code update, but it's really accelerating now, and it will be the main focus of our efforts for the better part of this year. And we're really breaking this up into 3 modules. So, so this review is really sort of giving the overview of where we see the challenges with the code, and that's what we'll get into tonight. And then we will focus on each module for a few months this year, and hopefully come back to council with the full recommended update for the zone later this year. So, so just a few housekeeping rules. You're muted. Please use the chat function on the bottom of your screen there. I think our next slide shows that. If you have any questions as we're going through here, or if you want to make any comments, we're going to have plenty of time at the end for questions. So you can ask them then, but feel free to use that chat function. It's really helped us to follow the dialogue as well. So so this is where we are on the overall the agenda tonight. I'm going to give you an overview, our key findings, our approaches, the proposed code structure, and then, like I said, have plenty of time for questions.
All right.
Katrina, you want to take it over?
Yep. Yes. So those who participated before may know this. We added some poll questions in between to get your feedback on the different sections of the presentation. In order to do that, you need to take out your phone or use a browser on your computer. And there, we have had some problems in the past with people texting to a number, which you can do. But we recommend to do it this way, that you're doing it through a browser window. And if you're on your computer, this should work pretty easily. So put into the computer the pullev.com-dps design which you see highlighted here in turquoise. And I'm gonna follow along so that we are all kind of at the same speed. And if you have any questions, put them in, or problems, put them in the chat window. Kate is gonna try to help you figure it out. We'll hope we won't have too many people with issues.
And just remind everyone, this is so that we can ask you questions as we're going through this presentation, and so
Yes.
that we can get your input as we're making the presentation. So it's a way
Yes.
for you to give direct input at specific points in the presentation.
Yeah, and so again, it's pull EV -DPS design. And it should prompt you to a page. And so let's get started. There will be, if you haven't gotten there, there will be on top of the page the website. And so the first question, as we are in New Mexico, as always, needs to be part of this: red or green? And I will definitely vote for red because it's the best. Red chili.
Katrina will drink the red chili as an appetizer for most of her meals.
I would, or as dessert works too. So it looks like we have pretty even split. Any other red supporters? Woo-hoo.
Oh, green is winning, Katrina.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, that was a warm-up question. Oh, there it is, 50-50. Okay, that was a warm-up question to get everybody started with us. And the next one, we just want to learn a little more about who's participating tonight, because I think, or we think it's important to kind of keep track, and then we can hopefully, if we don't hit a specific group of people, we'll try to do better next time. And we just, with the Downtown Master Plan, had a teen center meeting with like high school and middle school students, which was pretty awesome because they are not generally represented. Cool. So we have a pretty good distribution. Young people have not joined us yet. We will try to somehow catch them next time. All right. We'll go to the next question. What is your occupation? So this one is a word cloud or open-ended, and you can just put something in. Again, this is just for us to kind of understand who we're talking to. Retired, government, retail, economic developer. Cool. Oh, somebody retracted that. Chamber director. That's awesome. And so this really helps us kind of to understand who we're talking to. Planners, woo. Can we give it a couple more minutes?
Well, it seems like the right folks are in the room to talk code, so that's good.
Yeah. All right, we'll go to the next one. Have you ever looked at or used the county development code? That's just, I mean, the code really is more of a technical document. And so the presentation today will give you a better idea what's in there. And it looks like everybody has looked at it. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So nobody has not seen it. That's good. All right, next one. Why do you think zoning is important? And this is really an open question. And you can refer it back to Los Alamos. Why is it important in Los Alamos, or why is it important to you? And health and safety is definitely one of the ones that was first introduced. brings order to chaos. We need more of that. Neighborhood aesthetics. Yep. Helps organize the community, promotes like uses. Those are great answers.
They are great answers.
You're all hired. To separate residential areas from industrial and commercial areas. Cool. These are great. Quality of life. Protect neighborhoods and areas of the town. Yep, and we will be talking about that today as well. To establish community standards for design and development. Cool. Okay, we will be going into our presentation part. And so we will keep your browser window open. There will be more questions as we go through the presentation. The presentation is a little long, but there is a lot in the code that we need to cover and need to present to you and then solicit your input on. All right, so chapter 16. If you have looked at it before, it lives on the web right now on Municode. And Jessica, interject if I make any lethal mistakes here. And it was first established in 1965, which is quite old, and since then incrementally updated, but never the whole thing. So this is really a first. The development code contains zone districts and the allowable and prohibited uses. It outlines development standards like parking, landscaping, signage, and then it also outlines the procedures that go along with it. And a lot of communities have their codes in like a format like Municode, but if you have ever been on there, it's really hard to find what you're trying to look for, because it doesn't have cross-referencing. It doesn't really have illustrations, or tables are terrible in there usually. So a lot of communities have started, when they update their code, to try to get it into a format that's more user-friendly, like a PDF that is interlinked within the section, so you can jump around and look for things. You can bookmark things. So that's definitely one of the objectives of this project, is to make it easier to use, basically. And so the goal, as I was just talking about, one of the other goals is implementation of the vision of the comprehensive plan and the downtown master plans. And again, that's necessary because the code was established in 1965. And since then, obviously, Los Alamos has changed, the priorities of the community have changed, the built environment has changed, and the code has not changed alongside with it. And so what the objective of this project is to really align what the community's goals are with what the zoning code is trying to do. And then build efficiency and cross-referencing into the code. That's what we were just talking about, that Municode doesn't do currently, and then enhance the clarity of the code, which is, it's often left to interpretation, and that creates a lot of frustration, both for the people who are trying to do something, and then for neighborhoods when they are trying to have input on a project. And so, as Will was alluding to, the project is going to be updated in 3 modules. Module 1 will deal with the zone districts and use regulations. Module 2 will deal with the development standards like parking, landscape, and then module 3 will deal with the administration and procedure. And Jessica is going to talk a little more about that in a little bit. So the technical code review meeting that we are doing today basically is where we went to look at the existing code and identify what we think the strengths and weaknesses are. In order to do that, we organized four stakeholder meetings with people that are currently using the code and administering the code, to understand how they're using it and where there's problems or shortcomings with the code. And the technical review was done by the project team And that is then for us kind of to give a direction of what we think we can do with the code. But then obviously when we do the 3 modules, every aspect of the code is going to be revisited, and we are going to meet again with people who are in touch with the code to make sure that we are doing everything right. And then there will also be a land use analysis where we are looking at how the different districts are playing out on the ground and how they are working. All right, so the targeted user and admin interviews, as I was just saying, we met with county staff in different departments, and we also met with the development community and designers that are using the code to understand what the issues are when they are working with the code. And these are some of the issues that were highlighted, that the user code is not, the zoning code is not user-friendly. The code is not clearly organized. There's the missing cross-references that we talked about. The code language is often vague and ambiguous, and that's specifically like difficult to deal with for the county when they are trying to make an interpretation, and also difficult for the people that are trying to do a project because they don't really know what they are required to do. And then the administrative piece and enforcement, again, there's a lack of clarity in the development procedures, and then the development processes are not efficient and could be streamlined. So the public notification process needs to be refined, and then more clarity and direction is needed in review and approval criteria. So those are all things that we heard from the different groups we talked to, and that will be part of the starting point when we are starting to look at the code to update it. And other issues were generally the use regulations that came up earlier, that there needs to be an appropriate buffer or protections for existing neighborhoods, for example, and then development standards, incentives, incentivized goals such as mixed use and infill development, and corridors that connect housing and employment centers. All right, so the technical code review after this meeting tonight, we will be posting it to the website, and you can have a closer look at it. It's pretty long, but because there's not a lot of things you can do during COVID time right now, you can totally read that before you go to bed or on a lazy Sunday. And so it's structured as follows. We have an introduction, the diagnosis of the zoning regulations, a land use analysis, zoning approach that we are proposing, and then proposed code restructuring basically, and then a couple of appendices. But you'll get there. We encourage you to all look at it. Zoning is pretty fun once you get the hang of it. All right.
Not like Katrina said, it'll put you to sleep, so it's good bedtime reading.
Yeah, you could read it to your toddler who doesn't want to sleep, and after that he or she might totally fall asleep. Okay, so we'll have another question thrown in here. In your opinion, what is the most important goal of the code update? And these goals are partially from the comprehensive plan. So first one is alignment with the adopted county goals, making the code more user-friendly, streamlining the development process, creating neighborhood protections, or other. And if you put other, we will have a follow-up question in a second, right, Jessica?
I don't think for this one, but if you have another subject, if you could throw that into the chat, just so we know what you're thinking on that, that would be great.
And we got the chat question, what our website domain is. Kate, could you type that in there? So it's losalamosconnect.org, and we have all the work related to the downtown master plans in there, and we are starting to populate it with all the code information, and we will have the diagnosis on there.
Okay, and some of the others were improving the lighting ordinance, and then there's a few all of the above because the code is a mess.
Yeah. Okay, so streamlining the development processes so far, leading the goals. All right, next question. Are there code issues that you feel need to be addressed within the code update? So I guess that is
Yeah, it's probably
related to other.
similar to what we just heard.
There was another one in the chat box that was ensure highest and best use of scarce resources to ensure that community goals can be achieved.
Yep, lots of requests to revise the lighting ordinance so far.
And then there was one Euclidean versus form-based code. Jessica is actually going to talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
Lighting ordinance, and I think we are going to talk about that a little more later too. Hearing and appeal procedures.
Modern day uses.
Update the existing buildings, bringing the rest up to code. Short-term rental. Those are all good elements to include, and a lot of those. I mean, we only have like 2 hours tonight, and we are trying to get through it really quickly. A lot of what people are proposing is in the diagnosis, or we have included in there, and is going to be considered. Obviously, we can't touch on everything tonight, but if you have a free moment or two, you can review the technical review.
Yeah.
All right, we will go to the next section here. So key findings of the technical code review. So what we were saying earlier, the alignment of the comprehensive plan and other adopted goals for the county is one of the main goals of this. And we'll talk about those in a second. So align development standards with county comprehensive plan. So the goals of the comprehensive plan have been to have more infill, for example, and in order to do that, the code will be looking at specifically in White Rock to allow more uses in the downtown area and increase density potentially. In the downtown area in Los Alamos, that's already permitted in a lot of ways, but we are revisiting that also to figure out how that could be done and how it could be encouraged. Increase the variety of housing throughout the county, particularly within downtown. That again, we're trying to figure out what type of housing would be most appropriate and how can you encourage that if it's already allowed and if it's not happening. And then insufficient neighborhood protection standards that again came up earlier, also how to build in a buffer requirement everywhere where there is development that's incompatible next to each other. Then insufficient coordination between land use and transportation, incentivize mixed use, infill development, and connectivity between residential areas and employment centers. And then streamline the development review process, especially for projects that conform with the future land use map. The clarify the development standards and procedures. That is a big one for sure. And then strengthen review approval criteria. Jessica, you let me know if I'm forgetting anything.
No, you're doing great.
So the other goal of this is to align the downtown development standards with downtown master plans. So right now with the downtown master plans, we are in the period of drafting the goals. We had a visioning workshops, we had design workshops, we had surveys. And so now we are kind of drafting what those outcomes and the summaries from these goals were. And here are just some of what we've heard and how they can be addressed with the code. Again, there's lack of residential uses in the downtown areas in White Rock. That could be solved with creating a mixed use zone and allowing more of the residential uses in the downtown area. And then again, permit a variety of housing. So those are really along the lines of what the comp plan also is aiming for. And then create incentives to encourage a vertical mix of uses in both downtown areas. We'll be looking at how to integrate that into the code, address prolonged vacancies through ordinance or zoning. So there is a lot of talk about underutilized parcels and underutilized uses and how you could get around getting these developed and having better use of the land there. Create incentives and requirements for the provision of attainable housing for all new projects. And then lack of cohesive downtown identity and form. In White Rock, people did not feel like there was a downtown. So how do we get this distinct feel of a downtown area, both in White Rock and in Los Alamos? Is there an architectural style that we could require to be incorporated into the standards and new projects? And then integrate placemaking strategies to create a distinct downtown experience. So that would be something that we can address with the development standards that target that, and then create streetscape and landscape standards for both downtown areas that encourage pedestrian activities. So for example, require wide sidewalks, and that would also allow you to have more outdoor dining and stuff like that. All right, next one. So there were a lot of elements that were highlighted during our discussions with the downtown areas, but it's great because these two projects really go hand in hand. And a lot of what was a goal for the downtown areas can be implemented through the zoning code update. So there was an issue was raised for the lack of cohesive multi-use public spaces and pedestrian amenities. And so again, you can create standards to require the integration of public spaces for new developments. And obviously there's always this fine line that you walk. You don't want to make development more expensive, but you also want to provide amenities for the community with every development. So that we will be looking at. And then revise sidewalk requirements to require wider sidewalks. I was just talking about that too. Also accommodate commerce and outdoor dining. And then the abundance of surface parking was raised a lot. And that is one of the easiest tools in a way that a lot of communities have employed to just reduce parking requirements, and that then encourage higher density downtown. But then obviously you want to offset it with maybe a different parking management approach, that you create park and ride facilities, or you build a parking structure to offset the parking that is not provided. But then on the other hand, I mean, Los Alamos does have a lot of parking. So there is another element here that we are going to look at to see how parking can be treated and how it could make place for higher and better uses, maybe for the surface parking lots. And then also create landscape standards that really make parking lots less inhospitable. And then unsafe pedestrian bicycle crossings and conditions along a number of roadways. So we heard, for example, Trinity and State Route 4 have a lot of barriers for pedestrians when they're trying to cross, and how we address that. Again, the code can help with creating standards for pedestrian crossings or bicycle facilities. And last slide, for downtown, lack of appropriate bicycle infrastructure. That again was something I talked about just earlier. There can be standards that we incorporate that try to make those facilities safer and better. And then the lack of sustainability measures in the code, we heard a lot about that, integrating low impact development standards into the landscape requirements could be one way of providing more sustainability measures, and then encouraging solar covered parking, developing standards to increase tree coverage, and integrate standards for outdoor lighting fixtures that mitigate light pollution where appropriate, and integrate other sustainability measures where appropriate. So those are all things that came out of the discussions during the downtown master plan meetings. And these are all things that we will be rolling into the code update to look at and make recommendations on how these could be integrated and improved. All right, we have another, I hope I didn't put everybody to sleep so far. We have another question here. Are there any other county goals, policies that you feel need to be addressed? And obviously this is a very broad question. So just spitball something. And
Checking to make sure you're still awake at this point.
yeah, yeah, apologies.
Everyone's gone to sleep.
Yeah, that's all right. I understand.
Diversification.
Burdensome site plan review and approval process.
It's one we've heard several times already, so we'll keep an eye on that for sure.
Yeah. All right, we can move on. There will be other questions later on. We need to remember that's too restrictive code will obstruct development. Yes, and we are aware of that. It's a fine line in trying to get a little bit, but also don't ask for too much that development does not become feasible anymore or too expensive that people are not going to develop anymore.
Well, and I think that's one thing that makes our code writing team somewhat unique is we as planners write codes, but we also usher a lot of development approvals through various communities throughout the state and the Southwest really. So I feel have been pretty good at about being able to balance what community needs are versus what is realistic from a development standpoint. Okay,
Yeah.
Katrina, I'm gonna keep
Okay.
going
Yep.
with okay, so the second kind of big overall finding is something that we keep hearing over and over again, both from code administrators and from code users. And that is just the overall organization and structure of the code needs to be improved. So currently there's a lot of administrative pieces that are in various articles of the code. There's a lot of standards, especially like parking, that are sprinkled within various sections of the code. So creating a more kind of coherent user-friendly structure where all of the like site improvement and procedures, for example, are in one section. All of the development standards are in one clear section, and all of the use regulations are in one section. And that's kind of where that module structure we talked about earlier comes into play. And then just the idea that, like we mentioned, a lot of the language is vague or ambiguous, that there's not enough cross references. If there are different code pieces that need to be linked, that there's references to those, and just generally graphics are kind of missing from the code. And that brings me to general finding number 3, that in general, like I just mentioned, graphics, tables, and flowcharts are not part of the code. And we really see modern codes have a lot more of this within particularly their development standards section and their procedural sections. And we find that codes that are highly graphic are just easier for everyone to understand from a user standpoint, as well as to administer from an administration standpoint. So that's a major goal for the update. Number 4 is kind of a big one, and I'm going to do my best to kind of outline some of the major issues, but this is one that we're really going to focus on in Module 1. So these recommendations are still really preliminary, but it's the idea of consolidating the complex lineup of zone districts. So if you look at the code right now, the article that actually establishes the zone districts within the code, there's 27 or 21 of them that are outlined within that code. But when you really start looking at all of the sub-districts that can occur within some of those, there's really 39 base districts, which is a lot for a community of Los Alamos' size. And then when you really start analyzing them, many of those districts are really similar in terms of what they allow for uses and dimensional standards. And the idea here is the more of these districts that you have, the more complex your code becomes. So the more that you can streamline them, the better. And then the current code also is kind of unclear between some of what is considered a base zone. So something like a commercial zone or a residential zone would be a base zone district. And then an overlay, which is something that is additional regulations on top of what is allowed in that underlying zone. So the kind of preliminary recommendation is that we really think that we can do something to kind of consolidate this extensive lineup of zone districts into fewer and broader districts that are more flexible. And the way that we propose to do that is to really take a look at what's happening with them again, like I said, through cross-district comparisons, and look at where there's some opportunity to convert zones or to consolidate them or potentially eliminate them. And then to really provide clear distinctions between what acts like a base zone and what is an overlay, like, for example, the downtown that might need some additional protections. And so I'm going to go through just some of the preliminary findings in terms of the larger zoning categories. Again, Module 1 is all about uses in zone districts. So these are very preliminary findings. As we work through Module 1, we'll really start to create a list of what the final lineup will be, and that will be highly involved through the steering committee and public input. So in terms of residential districts, there's 21 purely residential districts right now. And they range anywhere from, you know, your estate and kind of your more agricultural districts, your single family, your multifamily, and then you've got a lot of specialty residential districts that are really only applied to specific areas. And in some cases, it's not really clear on dimensional standards what the variety, why there's such a variety, like for the single family districts, for example. And in some of them, like the planned development residential districts, that's not something that the county is even accepting anymore. So there's some opportunities to really look at how we can consolidate all of those into a clearer and more concise lineup. And then your mixed use and non-residential districts. So there's 2 districts right now that are kind of meant to be office and research and development. Again, those uses and dimensional standards for both of those are pretty similar, and especially the office district, there's only about 3 acres in the county total where that's even being utilized. So there may be some opportunity to look at how that can be done differently. There's 3 commercial districts right now outside of the downtown area. One of them seems to be a remnant of the system prior to the adoption of the downtown overlay zone and those sub-districts. And it isn't really needed with that structure. And then the other 2 can probably be consolidated into one district. And if we need special regulations for something like bigger box stores, I mean, you're probably not going to get a Costco, but even for something for like a Smith's or a larger strip mall, there's some opportunity to create use standards rather than a whole district for kind of larger commercial. And then the same with industrial. You have both an M1 and M2 district right now. There's really very little differentiation between uses and dimensional standards with those. So there's probably some likelihood that those can be consolidated. And then you have one truly mixed use district outside of the downtown areas, and that probably does need to remain. And then there's this slew of kind of special districts. So all kind of public county land, anything that's institutional has its own district right now. There's two kind of wilderness areas that are meant to preserve open space and scenic protections. Those seem like they're almost supposed to be more of an overlay to another base district, and they don't actually have any special protections. So that'll be something that'll be evaluated within Module 1. And then there's a whole separate district for land that is owned federally that is outside of the county jurisdiction, which is kind of not the norm. Generally, jurisdictions don't even designate lands outside of their boundaries. So that may be something that we could eliminate. And then lastly, in terms of zone districts, there's kind of three things that function as overlay districts right now. There is a whole section in the code about historic preservation, and that really seems like it should be an overlay district with special standards, but it's not applied to anything on the ground. So we can look at if that is needed. The downtown district we're going to get into in a little bit more detail later, but there's this whole structure of sub-districts that, again, when you start looking at, are really similar in terms of what they allow and can probably be consolidated to some extent. And that is really going to be informed by the vision that results out of the master plans that are going to be released in the next couple months. And then there's a special plan district, which really acts like a plan development district. And we do believe that that has a function and probably needs to stay, but there can be some updates made based on national best practice. The fifth kind of major key finding is that, as people have mentioned already through the survey, that we really need to modernize the land use classification system. We're totally with you on that one. There's a lot of kind of outdated uses, and a lot of the uses that are in your land use table right now are much too specific. So we anticipate that we're going to take a hard look at those uses to make sure that they are what is demanded by the current market today, and to really consolidate those into fewer, broader categories. And to just give you an idea of what we mean by that, Katrina, if you go to the next slide. So the list on the left here, this is just one kind of example that we pulled out to show you, are just some. This isn't even all of the industrial uses that are in your code, but right now they're really specific, like food processing facilities. You've got miscellaneous assembly, then there's things like electric appliance repair and equipment repair. All of those types of things are generally in more contemporary codes listed as just a light manufacturing. They don't call out every type of manufacturing under the sun. And so one strategy that is happening more and more in modern codes is, rather than listing all of these, I mean, every type of manufacturing or industrial practice that could happen under the sun, is to put it into these larger categories. And so, for example, the first three there could be categorized as light industrial, and that's really anything that happens within an enclosed building that doesn't have a lot of impacts on the adjacent landowner. Anything that's heavy manufacturing is really where you start to have some impacts on, more significant impacts on the environment, and that generally have some kind of fabrication or assembly process that happens outdoors. So there may be some nuisances to adjacent property owners, like sound or odor, you know, those types of things. And there's generally then some kind of protections that happen for those types of uses. Then you've got special manufacturing. Those are things that are usually like federally regulated. And then you could have things like natural resource extraction. So that's one way that we can start to look at how to potentially create broader categories where multiple manufacturing processes fit inside of them. Number 6 is all about creating more density in housing in downtown centers. This one is really goes back to aligning the code and the adopted policy of the county. There's a lot of comp plan policies that really say, you know, downtown is the place to create more housing, and especially with the limited land resources that the county has and the severe housing shortage, we really feel like there's a lot of opportunity to create more permissive housing types within the downtown and a greater density. And this is one way that we can protect single family neighborhoods, by really dedicating a place where those things are allowed and then setting up protection standards, which we'll talk about a little later. And then there's just a lot of county goals in general about provisions for affordable housing throughout the county. And like I mentioned, I think the goal is to have the highest densities and intensities within the downtown, but then as we go through module 1, to really evaluate all of the residential districts and see where there may be some opportunities to allow a greater variety of housing types that fit, you know, contextually within more suburban neighborhoods. And some strategies for that are things like reducing lot sizes or setbacks in certain residential districts where it is appropriate to do so. Number 9 seems to be one that all or several people here at least agree with, since we've heard through this survey. So streamlining the development process. We already kind of went through some of this, but there's a lot of language, especially in the code standards, that's really vague. There's a lot of inconsistencies between some of the code standards that exist today. The procedures section doesn't really outline, in a lot of cases, a lot of the information that the applicant really needs to know, or even that the neighborhoods need to know in terms of the entitlement process. And then one that we heard a lot through the interviews also is that the review and the criteria, the review and approval criteria, excuse me, for things like site plans, zone changes, often don't really align with what the goals of the policy are. So the recommendations here are to create clearer standards across the board, to ensure that the development procedures are, for things like notification, for criteria, are clearer, and then to really strengthen the criteria for approvals to make sure that they're achieving what the county is looking for them to do. Number 7, built-in neighborhood protections. So this is something we hear in every community that we work with. And it's something that the comp plan has quite a few policies in place already in terms of how to protect the character and the stability of single family neighborhoods. That's a big goal of the plan. And we feel particularly in areas like downtown, where you're gonna allow higher development densities, you really wanna have strong neighborhood protections in place. So making sure that at least in those areas where you have non-residential or mixed use development directly adjacent to lower density single family development, that there's some automatic protections in place for things like landscape buffers or height step downs. And those protections and what they are will work with the community to make sure that we get right. And that'll happen in module 2. Built-in flexibility. Again, we've heard a lot. One of the big goals for streamlining the development process in particular is just making sure that there's enough flexibility in the code to really deal with the challenges that come up in every entitlement process. It's kind of inevitable. So making sure that the standards provide enough flexibility for unexpected things that are going to come up. And where you plan to do that through, like we said, broader use categories, creating more flexible standards, particularly within the mixed use and the downtown districts. And then one big thing that all modern codes are moving to that we don't really see within the existing code is having some kind of built-in allowance for administrative deviations. So generally that's in a 10% or lower threshold. That number can always be negotiated for what Los Alamos finds to be most appropriate, but allowing the trained and educated planning staff that you have to be able to make some calls to make sure that development is feasible, but still meets, like we mentioned, county goals. One more, I think, Katrina, right? Yeah. And then I think this is the last of the findings, is this idea of building in resiliency. So Katrina mentioned throughout the master planning process for the downtowns, we've heard over and over again that there's a need for improved dark sky standards. There's a need for energy efficiency within buildings and things like low impact development. And we agree that most modern codes do have a lot more of those types of practices built in, and that the code update really should look at strategies for things like wildlife protection, mitigating heat island effect. There's a lot of call for protection of sensitive areas, and we can work with the community to make sure that there's overlays in place to protect those areas, and then just general standards for things like low impact development strategies. Okay, so that is just kind of a brief overview of our general findings. I know that people here probably have a lot of really specific comments on things like signage and the lighting ordinance. And I just want to put out there that we have looked at those things. And like Katrina mentioned, the complete code review assessment will be put up on the website in the next couple days, and that definitely has a whole section on more specific content and does have some really preliminary recommendations for things like lighting that we're seeing here, for things like signage and parking. So please take a look at that document, and there's a comment function on the website where you can send us any additional comments if you think that we've missed the mark on any of those types of things. So we're seeing here in response to the question, what are the biggest code issues? Lack of sustainability, parking, the lighting ordinance, administrative procedures. So those are definitely all things that we already plan to look at, and we'll continue to do so as we move through this process. The next one. And then the next question that we were just kind of looking for those of you, I mean, it seems like everyone here, based on the survey earlier already, is somewhat familiar with the code. So are there any specific sections that you really feel are unclear or difficult to understand that we really need to focus on as we go through this update? Sign code. Okay, got it. Parking. Both of those are things that we've, oh, there we go. That's a nice one to hear. And the parking and the sign code are things we've gotten a lot of comments on already through the those initial interviews that Katrina mentioned. So we'll definitely keep looking at those, and special use permits as well.
And Jessica, there was also a comment earlier in the chat box about some residential neighborhoods being grandfathered in or something, and that's something we heard about too, that there's non-conformities that with the existing code because some development happened prior to the zoning code. So we are looking at that as well. Yeah,
and Kate will actually touch upon that here in a little bit too. So we've got that.
How exciting.
Yeah. All right, you want to go to the next one?
Yep. Voila.
So we mentioned that we plan to already evaluate the uses, and we know that we're going to need to bring contemporary uses into the code, things like live work, housing types, short-term rentals. We'll probably end up having to look at marijuana related uses, but is there anything in particular that this group feels in terms of uses that really needs to be looked at? Throw it out there now and we'll make sure we get it. What was another one? ADUs. I know that's
tiny homes.
Tiny homes. That's one that's come up.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot. They're not coming to me at the moment.
Public Wi-Fi space. That's something we also heard during the downtown master plan discussions.
And I'll work at home strategies for the future. So there's already some kind of home occupation, but we can definitely take a look at that in the code. Allowable animals. That may be
Like a mini donkey.
issue, but yeah. Typical community commercial uses. Okay. All right, you
All
want to
right, next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Loading the image.
Yeah. Okay. And so this one is about, I mean, we've heard, especially during the downtown master plan process, obviously, that there's a lot of need for increased housing variety and density within the downtown, but we're just kind of trying to get a feel for, is there other areas in the county where people potentially see opportunities for increased housing varieties and densities, or do people feel like that really needs to just concentrate in the downtown area? So this one, you just drop a pin directly on the map where you feel like maybe we can at least explore some options for housing.
So it looks like North Mesa got a couple of pins, and then DP Road.
Yeah.
We know this image is a little
Yeah, it's
Blurry.
a little.
to determine exactly where you are in the county.
Yeah, it's hard to get one map that has White Rock and.
Yeah. Yeah, so White Rock is on the bottom in case you haven't seen it.
Yeah. So you can always put in the chat function.
Yes. Yeah.
Just where you see opportunities as well.
Maybe give people just another minute on this one and then go to the next.
Yep. All right. Let's go to the next.
And then we've heard already from a lot of you about the lighting ordinance and kind of the dark sky initiative, but what are other types of sustainability practices that you really feel like we need to make sure get incorporated within the code update? Solar ready houses.
And there's always the distinction to be made between what the building code can address and what we can address with zoning, but we will definitely look at some incentives that could be built into incorporating more sustainability practices into development in general.
Residential solar. Parking lot. Yep, that's a big one.
Impervious.
Impervious surfaces. Passive solar. Dark skies, got it. We know that's a big one.
Parking standards.
Okay, I think that's the last survey question, right?
Incentives for sustainable building practices. Okay, next.
All right, we got two more major sections and then we'll wrap up with the presentation portion. So Katrina mentioned earlier on that we have been doing a land use analysis as well as reviewing the actual development standards. So Kate's going to talk about some of our kind of preliminary findings for that.
Yeah, so this is more about looking at the zoning map and the zoning that's currently on the ground and comparing it to what the land is being used for. So there's 4 findings we have just briefly for this section. There, like was mentioned before, Jessica mentioned, there is a large number of like zone districts. And this definitely creates unnecessary complexity within the code. So we would like to see these zone districts consolidated. And several of these have the same uses, have the same or very similar, at least, dimensional standards. So that makes it a little bit easier to consolidate for us. And then this is a zoning map of Los Alamos town site. And as you can see, the different neighborhoods are almost all different colors. And that is a reflection of the 21 purely residential zoning districts that Jessica had mentioned earlier. And so that's just an illustration of how complicated the zoning code gets when you add so many zone districts. The second issue, somebody had brought this up already, that there are a number of residences that have nonconformities. And this is due to the historical development pattern of these residential neighborhoods. Some were developed before the zoning code was in place. So we recommend remapping these non-conforming neighborhoods to more appropriate zoning districts. And also another best practice we've seen is creating categories that are either benign nonconformities or significant nonconformities. And these have different review and approval processes depending on which they are. The third finding it's the discrepancies between zoning and land use. So there are several areas where the zoning doesn't actually match up with the land use. And we have touched on this already a little bit too. But there are some mixed use districts that are not fully utilizing the height potential or vertically mixing uses. There are some professional office districts. There are actually only 4 parcels that are zoned PO, and 2 of them are actually using the professional office uses. The other 2 are not. The downtown overlay districts in White Rock, there's 1 right now being used, and it's mostly low density single family houses. And then the public lands is used extensively for recreation throughout the county. And these are naturally undevelopable lands, down in the canyons where you can't really build much, but there's still zone PL, which is in the zoning code is for local government and school district uses and structures. So it doesn't quite match up how you are all using the zone district there. So the recommendation is to consolidate and to even downtown, which Jessica will touch on, to create a form-based code or something like a form-based code to guide a better development of these areas to what you actually want them to look like. So the next slide has the White Rock downtown area, or at least the commercial core. And you can see in the red that it's mostly commercially zoned with C1, C2, and then C3 up near the road, the main road. And you can see in the pink, that's the downtown district. And the new homes in White Rock are in this downtown district, but not much of it is being used for the actual uses of this district. And then the fourth land use analysis finding is the conversion of commercial to mixed use zones. And this creates a lot of spot zoning for commercial zones within the county. So we are researching the best practices to make sure that this doesn't continue into the new code. So I'm gonna bounce it back to Jessica.
Okay, so we wanted to just talk quickly about some of the zoning approaches that are out there and available as we look at what the new code structure is going to be moving forward. And so one of the big pieces that we really need to kind of evaluate as we start to move forward with these modules is the overall zoning approach that we're going to take as we start to update this code. And there's a variety of different zoning approaches that are available, anything from Euclidean to form-based to hybrid. So if we go to the next slide, Katrina. So the actual technical code review document, like I said, will be on the web sometime in the next couple days, and it kind of talks about the pros and cons for each of these types of approaches that are available to the county as we move forward. I'm not going to spend too much time going into all of them because we've already been here an hour, and I'm sure we want to keep this moving along. So read that document for future detail. But the idea here is most of the code, the way that it's written right now, is Euclidean zoning, which is an approach that really is all about kind of separating uses to make sure that there's less disturbances between land uses. There's other approaches, some of which are kind of already built into the existing code, like performance zoning, that really looks at how to provide less disturbances from land uses by what's called a performance standard. Those can be kind of difficult to create and burdensome and difficult to administer, and they're often costly to administer. So that's kind of one thing to consider with performance zoning. There's this idea of incentive zoning, where the county really allows more flexibility in terms of development standards. Usually they result in kind of higher and taller buildings, or being able to put more of a building on a larger portion of the lot for in return of some kind of public benefit. So additional open space, having a number of affordable housing units within the development. The other option is something like a form-based code, which is really meant to create more compact and efficient land use patterns. Again, those can be somewhat complex when they're created, and they may become difficult to administer. So you just kind of have to keep an eye on that. Or to do a hybrid approach that kind of takes bits and pieces from these different zoning types and applies them as appropriate, which is somewhat of the approach of what is done in the existing Chapter 16 today. So in terms of our kind of approach, we do feel like a hybrid approach going forward, as is the current practice within the Chapter 16 Development Code today, is probably appropriate. There's kind of two big options really when we start to look at the downtown portion, and that is the idea of, we continue this idea of base zones and overlay districts, which is more of the Euclidean coding structure everywhere. And we really look at consolidating some of those sub-districts within the downtown and trying to create more flexible standards within that structure. The second option is to kind of keep more Euclidean use controls throughout the majority of the county like there is today, and then to do a more form-based control within the downtown district. The overlay district that is currently being utilized today was really meant to be more of a form-based code. It has some structural issues, and it doesn't actually quite function like a traditional form-based code. So if we go to that approach, if you go to the next slide, please, Katrina. There are some recommendations that we would have. So when you do a form-based code, there has to be some kind of a clear regulating plan of how that code is organized. And in this case, based on the preliminary feedback that we've heard from all of the visioning stuff for the downtown master plans, we believe that a street-based regulating plan, like is shown on this slide, is probably more appropriate. There's been a lot of concerns about development character, especially along designated Main Street corridors like Central. And so using a street-based regulating approach would let us really tailor the development character along certain streets. And that would replace the kind of district approach that is being utilized now. If we do a form-based code, we really are going to need some better building and kind of public space standards that we would need to look at. And again, all of those things would take guidance from what the established vision is within the pending downtown master plans. And so with that, we're going to kind of go into what we're proposing in terms of the kind of overall code structure. Again, this is our recommendation, and we'll continue to tweak this as we get public comment going forward. But as our recommendation is now, is that we create these various articles, like we've already mentioned, within the the development code. So the first article would really be all of the kind of general legal provisions that need to happen based on state law. And then the remainder of the articles would really follow a very similar structure to the module approach that we are planning on updating the code with. So articles 2 and 3 would be what would constitute module 1. So the first article or the second article would be all about getting that lineup of zone districts established and any kind of district specific standards that would happen only within those districts. And the third article would carry forward the use regulations. Article 4 would be all about the development standards. Article 5 is all about administration and enforcement. And then you could either have a separate article for definitions or those could be contained within appendices. And so just kind of a general overview of what we imagine that that's going to look like going forward. So this is Article 2. We think, like we mentioned, one of the major goals is to really make this code more graphic moving forward. So each zone district is going to kind of get its own intent section that has an intent statement of what the district is really intended to do. The section below there is going to be any kind of district specific standard that only applies within that zone. And then we anticipate there to be graphics that kind of illustrate the intent of the district and then show a lot of the really specific dimensional standards like lot widths if we, choose to have them, setbacks, minimum building heights, and then any kind of cross references to other applicable standards like parking, outdoor lighting, things that need to be considered within that zone would have cross references as well. The same kind of overview portions are going to happen to the overlays as well. So this is an example from another code we worked on where there was a downtown overlay. It'll have a similar structure where it kind of gives the intent of the overlay zone, any kind of any overlay specific standards that have to happen within that zone, and then a map of where that actually applies within the county. Article 3, like we mentioned, is use regulations. So we do plan to carry forward the use index matrix that exists within the code today with a couple of major updates. So all of the zone districts that are identified within the code will be within this table, which is something that doesn't currently happen in the existing code. There's some zone districts that aren't listed in the table, which creates some confusion. Like we mentioned, we're going to update all of the uses to make sure that they're more flexible and reflect market demands. And then one big piece that we feel is critical is creating an additional column that indicates if that use, so if you're looking at doing a single family home, if there's a use specific standard that happens just for that use, you have to see that section and that'll be cross-referenced. A lot of like industrial standards, for example, or like we mentioned, like big box commercial may have some specific standards that only apply to that use, and that cross-reference should be clearer. And then all of those use specific standards will also be revised and evaluated, and they'll follow this use table within the code structure. And then the next article is all about development standards. So this is where all those standards that currently live in various places of the code will end up. So it'll be all the big sections like parking, landscaping, and signage that are already kind of separate sections within the code. But then like outdoor lighting, for example, in the existing code is actually covered under a use specific standard. Walls and fences are as well. Those really aren't specific uses. They're more development standards that apply generally. And so they'll be captured within that section. And we mentioned earlier that this section is going to have a lot more graphics and tables to kind of illustrate any kind of complex development standards and make sure that they're legible. The last major article is all about administration and enforcement. So we've mentioned that we feel like the code really needs to be clear in terms of who is going to, well, what are the available development actions that are on the books for the county? What kinds of things can you request? Whom is going to be the approving body for that application? Does it require a hearing? What is your public notice? And then what are your timeframes in terms of approvals, and whom hears an appeal if there is one? So one of the major goals for this section is to include something like you see here, which is a summary of the development review procedures. It's a table that's going to have all of your development actions and then all of that information outlined. And then this section additionally will also contain all of the information about the governing bodies, what their roles and responsibilities are, any type of procedure for things like site plans. Nonconformities will also be covered in this section, and then any kind of enforcement violations or penalties that the county has in place. Okay, so with that, I think we've covered the main gist of everything that's in the document. Like I said, there are a lot of really code specific, content specific pieces that we didn't highlight today for things like signage and lighting that, you know, if you're interested in knowing what our preliminary findings are, you can delve into that document and it'll tell you. But based on what you've heard today, is there anything that we've missed? Is there anything you want to make sure that we really consider within the code update? Use that survey function to let us know here.
It looks like it was covered, maybe.
I think we've just put everyone to sleep.
I think we're just ready to open it up for general questions too.
Yeah.
And then again, the website will have the document posted there tomorrow, and you will find it under the code updates section.
Yeah, and Kate just updated the chat function with that website.
Okay.
And so if anybody has any particular comments too, like Will said, we can just kind of open it up for general questions. You can either type those in the chat or we're in Zoom, right? There's a raise your hand feature.
Yeah, I think so. But I think people can unmute
Patrick
themselves.
Sullivan.
Yeah.
Patrick Sullivan raised his hand, so I think just unmute yourself, Patrick, and ask your question.
Hi, yeah. So I've got 3 different questions, and I'll kind of ask them all at once and let you guys answer them as we go through. But several different times I saw when you were analyzing the code, under your recommendations, you had suggested recommendations like create streetscapes, create standards that blank. Are you going to be providing very specific actionable recommendations on those, or is that outside of your scope of work? The second question is, I believe I saw something that alluded to strengthening the review process. And I believe that was related to site plan review or other types of code review. And I was just curious as to what that was. And the third one was related to the street-based coding, which in general, I think is a good idea, but I'm curious as to how you would suggest covering developments that cover multiple streetscapes. So something that might be an entire block that spans from Trinity all the way to Central.
All right.
Jessica, you want to take those? Or
Yeah, I wrote the last 2 down. So the first one was about development standards and kind of general.
Well, about streetscape, I think it's about
Yeah.
more the public realm
Right.
and versus on-site standards.
So the first question was relating to, in multiple cases, I saw some kind of generic recommendations, and I was wondering if they were going to be more specific and targeted in the final report, or if that was kind of outside of the scope of what you're contracted to do.
So yeah, yes and no. So there's a section in the code review that will be posted on the website that is a content specific overview. So things like parking and lighting, there are some really preliminary recommendations in terms of the types of things that we feel like are probably needed, like for example, incentivizing, why is none of that coming to me at the moment? Like potential reductions for off-street parking requirements could be one of those within the downtown area. And so some of that is covered within the content specific section of the code review. We just didn't have time to go through every section of that with you all today. So look there. And then for development standards in particular, all of that will be covered through module 2. So the way that that is going to work is when module 2, when we have a draft of module 2, obviously it'll have pretty extensive updates, and there'll be an extensive footnoting system that will kind of keep track of what has significantly changed. And there'll be plenty of time for public comment and review through that process to kind of make sure that we've caught the right recommendations.
And I think what we're trying to do, Patrick, especially in the downtown areas, is strike that right balance between requiring certain development standards on new development, but not putting it to the point where we're really making it too prescriptive and also just making it overly complicated. I think the development standards that are in the downtown code now are just they don't quite hit the mark. So that's what we'll be looking at.
And then the second one was about strengthening the review process. And so we heard a lot, especially during the user interviews, that a lot of the decisions that get made at planning and zoning, for example, don't always align with the review criteria. And you know, those decisions are meant to implement adopted goals and policies. So the idea is to really look at the review and approval criteria that governing bodies use to make sure that they are strong enough to implement county goals, and that there's no ambiguity, that it's clear both on the developer side and on the county side of what is expected to get those approvals.
And I'd say in the third question, Patrick, about if we did street-based coding and you had development that spanned multiple streets, the idea would be that if it was frontage along Trinity, would have different standards than if it was on Central. And but we're not, I think that this is, you know, we're at the very preliminary stages of this, and we've not made any decision about that yet. So
okay, I appreciate the answer. I would just say that in terms of the review process, having been a former P&Z commissioner and being involved in a lot of developments over the past couple of years, I oftentimes find that there's confusion amongst the commissioners as to what is in their purview to ask about and approve or not approve versus what the actual criteria are. So I would encourage you to take a long look at that and help us get a more streamlined process to understand exactly what the purview of that commission is and what they're there to approve and what is kind of outside of their scope of approval. Thank you.
Sure.
And we heard that also during the initial interviews, that is a issue currently. And I think the DA also had his hand up initially. DA Selman. I think you can unmute yourself.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
I thought
Yep.
I did, but okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for your clear and comprehensive presentation. I appreciate that, the work, all the work that went into it. And so I'm Didier Somo. I live in White Rock, and I'm one of the people concerned with the outdoor lighting in the county. And I don't know how much you know about this, but a group of us of various organizations in Los Alamos County and the surrounding area have been talking about this for about a year. And we've talked with a lot of subject matter experts, and we've looked at lighting ordinances in similar communities. We looked at that of Flagstaff, Moab, the neighboring village of Hemet Springs, and also looked at a sort of a generic lighting ordinance from the International Dark Sky Association. And we have put together a draft lighting ordinance that started circulating around the county staff and the power brokers in the county, I guess, and the council members last fall. So a lot of research has gone into this and to adapt all this to Los Alamos County. And I guess what we'd like to do at this point, is how do we interact with the process of writing that particular section of the code? How, because we hope that our work, most of that work will find its way into the new code, the new lighting ordinance for Los Alamos, so that section of the code. But we'd like to know how we go about this, interacting with you and being part of the discussion as we refine our draft document. And I don't know, do you have a copy of that document?
Yes, we did get a document. We did get a copy of that document at the end of the week last week. So we started looking at it. So development standards are going to be part of module 2. So module 1, we're looking at kind of, so the idea behind the process is that these modules will work sequentially and they'll be released incrementally. So the idea is that we really need to make sure that we get the zone district lineup right, because a lot of the development standards will probably be linked to those districts, so that we get the districts and the use regulations set up first. And then once that structure has kind of been reviewed and we've gotten some consensus from the community, we move forward with the development standards. So outdoor lighting will be looked at within module 2. We do have those standards. We can't guarantee that they're going to go into the code verbatim, but we'll definitely look at them. And there will be opportunities as we start to release module 2 in terms of review. And we can, as we get to that section, I'm sure that we can include your group within the discussion, at least for that section, when we start to update those particular standards.
And
That's
there's
great,
also-
Katrina. This is Margaret. I think,
yeah.
yeah, if we could just make the point to where the community can provide that feedback on an ongoing basis, and maybe just have it queued up for when we get to module 2, i.e. The LA Connect webpage. If you could just give a brief overview of how they can provide written feedback.
Yeah, so the idea is, as we work through these modules, we're going to be working with the steering committee to actually draft all of the, to evaluate the existing code sections and then to draft the recommendations. And so as those modules get released, they're going to get released onto the Los Alamos Connect webpage. There's a section of that webpage that's specific to the code update. So all of the draft standards will be put onto that webpage for public review and comment, and their release will be timed with a public meeting like we're doing now. So we'll go over all of the major changes that have occurred within that section and all of our recommendations. We'll present them to the public, and then those documents will be made available on the website for public review and comment.
And we anticipate starting module 2 late spring, early summer. Yeah.
Yeah, module 1 is anticipated to be released in May, and then starting in June, we'll start on module 2, which is all of the development standards. And we can definitely follow up with you and your group when we get to the lighting section.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Is there anybody else? There's no hands up right now. Do you have any questions, comments, ideas in addition? I know that was a lot to cover, and if this piqued your interest, there's a whole document that will take even a little longer to go through by yourself. We will be posting that to the website, and you can, if you want us to let you know when it's up, you could leave your email address in the chat box too, and we can email you directly. It looks like Patrick has another question.
Yeah.
Patrick, go ahead.
I would just encourage you to, as you're going through this process and looking at other places, to really try to think outside the box and look at some very progressive cities in terms of what they're doing with how they've refined their code. I think our community is well situated to kind of be on the cutting edge of especially on the commercial development side, given the constraints we have and the difficulty with commercial development. So I would just encourage you to be creative and kind of push the limits a little bit on what you consider for us. Thank you.
We like to be creative, so we will definitely take that on.
And if you have any specific recommendations, Patrick, we're open to that too.
All right, well, I guess if nobody else has any comments, we'll call it a night.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone, for
Yep.
taking part in your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And check out the website. There will be all the updates will be on the website, including the whole code review, technical review for your review. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.